everyone. Happy New Year. Welcome to yet another event of the King's E-Lab. I'm so delighted to see you all. I see some familiar faces, some new faces. That's excellent. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, please do subscribe to our newsletter so you're up to speed with all of our events. Also, please visit our website. We have some great events scheduled up. I'm very proud to say that we will host some amazing women this time, no offense. We will have the managing director of BCG. We will have the chair of Uber UK, so you can be looking forward to great events this term. Also, my great friend and colleague Reese is hosting a great workshop, so there will be more hands-on sessions, so do attend those as well, please. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce today's guest. As always, whenever we have guests who wrote a book, we give you a chance to win one today. So during the format of today will be a 30-minute keynote, and we will open the floor to your questions. Whoever does and has the most interesting question will get a book. We have 2 books, so try and think of something very clever to ask, and you can win one as well. Now, I would like to introduce our speakers. We have David Kopp and Richard Buslato, who have been successful investment managers for 3 decades, working among the most celebrated funds. Due to their extensive research into sustainable investing, they left the industry to focus on the true meaning of sustainability and a proper purpose for investing, to improve the planet's timeless capacity for life. Now, I can honestly say that they are the most down-to-earth guys, and pun intended, and you can be looking forward to a great session today. Without further ado, Richard, welcome to King's, and David, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. So thank you very much for inviting us here and giving us this opportunity. And we really appreciate it. We want to take this as an opportunity to call on you to join us to stop climate change, basically. So that's it. That cat on the back. That's what it is. And the reason is because investment and entrepreneurship have become arrogant under the guise of sustainability in the face of climate change. And if you take a look at the latest sustainability plan from Norges Bank, what you see is really ambitious targets and a roadmap to 2050 that cuts emissions right across. But what it hides is a fundamental, unsustainable truth that we have no mechanism to cut oil, gas, or coal production in the world. Now, Norges Bank is $1.2 trillion. It is one of the largest investment funds in the world. It is Norway's sovereign fund to benefit the people of Norway for all generations. It is controlled by the Norwegian government. Its money comes from the exploration of oil and gas only. The company that provides it with the money, Equinor, is now called Equinor to get rid of the oil part of its name, is also controlled by the Norwegian government. And all 3 are insistent that it is not their job to cut production of oil, gas, and coal. When Richard and I realized this a couple of years ago, we left the investment industry. And we spent a cathartic year reconciling how we spent 30 years working for pensions, endowments, sovereign wealth to make the world better, to find that investments and entrepreneurship no longer benefit the world. We wrote our book. You always have to plug it. Yes, if I can get this to, oops, going back, going forward. There you go.
There you go.
You always have to plug it. Do have a look at it. It has a lot of experience in it in that way. I'm going to leave it up there so you can hear a little bit about what diversity of people say about it. And what we wrote a book, and then what we want to say from there, out of that, in this past year, is really how do we end up reconciling back investments and entrepreneurship? How do we rescue that back from there?
Well, the reason is actually pretty simple. Like the great poet and former world champion Mike Tyson said, you know, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And most people have plans. The problem is that climate change at the moment is making the weather go crazy. And it has put the traffic policeman into early retirement. There is no one left to keep a tab on what's happening.
On the weather.
So just before Christmas, I think you remember there was a big story in the US about Cheyenne Airport. It's in Wyoming. I thought I was good at geography, by the way. I didn't actually know where Cheyenne was. The temperature dropped from +5 to -15 in 15 minutes. If you parked your car and you went in to see your loved one off and you came out, likelihood was the car wouldn't start because they're not made to cope with that kind of drop in temperature. If you're self-employed, you've lost a day's earnings because you are not going to go to work. If you were flying out to a business meeting or you were keeping a deadline, you were not going to get in the air because the amount of flights kept going up and up and up. And at the end, it was 30,000 delayed or canceled flights because of a place most people have never heard of. Flights from Tokyo to Hawaii couldn't come off ground. Flights from London to Chicago couldn't come off ground. Why? Because actually we're reliant on all these planes being in the air because there is no space on them on the ground to land. That tells you how interconnected the world economy has become. And climate change is really hitting it. It's like a myriad of spinning plates out there. And they need to keep spinning all the time for our economy to function. That's how fragile it has become. The moment one of these plates come down, it takes lots of others with it. So these sustainability plans are effectively made to keep us in a form of mass delusion that net zero will lead us to a form of promised land at the end of it all. I'm here to tell you, and David is here to tell you, that the worst kept secret in financial markets is that there is no promised land.
Now, the basic problem is climate change can't be undone. And my 11-year-old daughter gets this, right? So last summer, we were in a car in the heat of the summer, and she turns to me and says, "Dad, if we stop all our emissions today, the weather is not going to change back, is it?" Climate change is like mixing paint. Once you start the stirring, there is no going back. And if she gets it, and she's only 11, we all get it. The problem is businesses say, our memorandum of association doesn't include stopping climate change. What it does tell us to do is to take advantage of climate change to make profits. So the more climate change we get, the more profits we can make. And we call on governments, and governments tell us, we only have power if we stay in office, which means that the priority will always put climate change at best as the second most important thing to do. Scientists, they say, well, you know, we tell you the facts, but someone has to do the other stuff. And environmentalists and activists are pulling in all directions. And when they do that, they turn into a Tower of Babel. And in the confusion, oil, gas, and coal production increases every year. Oil, gas, and coal are like the snacks you put out on the table. Someone's always going to pick it up. And you can say, I never touch the stuff. I never eat snacks. But it doesn't matter, because when someone else picks it up, the result is all the same. We all get hurt.
David and I went back to our very roots as an exercise to construct an asset pricing model to figure out how much climate change is costing us. And we concluded that companies at the moment, and we look through our pensions, by the way, because that's how you normally keep up to date once you're not trading anymore. It's like, how much is my pension worth? Companies today are probably worth no more than half their current market value if you factor in the real risk of climate change. And how do you end up there? It's basically because at the end of the day, there is no insurer of last resort for climate change. Because you can't divest, you can't hedge, and you can't diversify planetary risk. So there's no one left holding the can. Politicians like to say that the war in Ukraine has caused, energy prices to go sky high and food prices to go up. But actually, it has very little, if anything, to do with that. The reason that we have a cost of living crisis is that we are running out of resources in the world. And governments are very soon going to find that they can no longer support people by shielding them from the truth and subsidizing them to hide the true cost of what the climate is throwing up. Hurricane Ian hit Florida. First estimate was that the cost was going to be about $200 billion. Now most people assume it's going to be 300 billion and change. And it keeps going up every day. At the moment, California has a state of emergency imposed. So climate change doesn't even care if you're rich and famous. You're still going to get evicted from your home. And if you think you're rich in the face of climate change, pretty much all of us are very, very soon going to find out we ain't rich enough.
And it's not just the disruptions. We can't actually produce copper fast enough. We can't produce semiconductor chips fast enough. We can't grow crops, feed our livestock, because all these things need water. It takes several hundred tons of water to produce 1 ton of copper. It takes several thousand gallons of water to make 1 single wafer of integrated silicon chips. Just 1 single wafer. It takes up to 4,000 liters of water to grow 1 kilogram of wheat. And in this stampede for net zero, what we've done is push the demand on materials, energy, and labor to their limit, so much that businesses cannot survive. At the beginning of 2022, most wind turbine manufacturers faced bankruptcy. In November last year, the CEO of Airbus, the second most valuable brand in the aerospace and defense industry, said, I don't know how many planes we can make this year because I have no idea whether we can get hold of materials. And I have no clue what our clients can pay anymore. This is how investments and entrepreneurship have become toxic.
Ultimately, climate change is not about net zero. It's not about renewable energy, and it's not about sustainability. It's actually about the things that give us joy. What gives me joy most of all, I mean, I like Italy winning football, etc. But apart from that, they are my children. They're the reason David finds joy, the children. It's how I spent more than 30 years getting up at 5 in the morning, working a full day, getting home, staying up till US closes late night, getting up for Asian opening at 2 a.m., and then I'm up again at 5. Now, I enjoy doing that because I've been fortunate enough to have done a work I really enjoy. But it's ultimately about these things of joy, i.e. your children, that you do this. Children are what gives us faith in the future, and it gives us the courage to push the stop button on climate change. Transformational ownership is a stop button or a blueprint for climate change. And if you are someone who actually appreciates the things that give you joy, you will come to the conclusion that the only people who will push the stop button for climate change are those who actually care about what gives them joy. You need to ask yourself that question. Are you going to be the person pushing the stop button on climate change? If you do, you will put a lid on climate change. You will also take control of the oil, gas, and coal companies and distribute the profits to everyone around the world. In 2021, that would have been $15 for every man, woman, and child all over the planet. In 2022, it's a lot more, somewhere between $20 and $25. It means, you know, a newborn child in sub-Saharan Africa, grandmother in New York, office worker in Kuala Lumpur, all get $15 last year and $25 this year.
So transformation ownership puts all the people who care about the things that give them joy in charge. It is an example of the kind of governance, the novel governance that Elinor Ostrom talked about, which won her the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2009. People come together, and because they come together, they bring the businesses and the governments to create the carrot and the stick to govern the commons. It doesn't come from businesses, it doesn't come from governments, it's led by people. Now, any business can be a part of the transformational ownership community. All it needs to do is just to take a small fraction of all the money that we pay them as a fee to maintaining the planet. But this is our money. It's not theirs, it's our money. We are the transformational owners. We are the ones who call on the businesses to take that fraction out to contribute to maintaining the planet as a fee. And we are the one that uses it to take over the oil, gas, and coal companies to put us in charge so that we can cut production in line with government's net zero pledges. And then we can call on the government and say, you've got to be more aggressive about it. And to distribute all the profits from these oil, gas, and coal companies back to everybody in the world. Just write everyone a check. Once you take the money motivation out of it, you transform ownership into protecting the planet and its people. Now, when your business does that, it is now transformed into the hero of our climate change story. And with oil, gas, and coal production explicitly limited, investments and entrepreneurship recovers its ability to benefit the world. And when you and your business are part of it, you will naturally want to favor trading with other businesses which are part of your community. And your children will look at you with pride because they will see that you have given them back a future they can aspire to. But you can choose not to be a part of it. It's your choice. You and your business can choose not to be part of cutting oil, gas, and coal production, even when we're not ready. You can make up the excuses. We've got to get more renewables. We've got to get all these things first. But when you do that, people and businesses within the transformational ownership community will be lobbying governments as they punish them for free riding. And they will be boycotting you. You will find yourself being sued. You have just placed yourself into exile. Remember those stories of back into the day. The only thing worse than death was to be exiled. And your own children will look at you and shun you for taking away their future.
So, cutting oil, gas, and coal production will obviously introduce a very severe constraint. There's no illusions about that. But the fact is that at the moment, on this planet, we produce enough energy to send each and every one of us to the moon every year. And out of all this energy that we consume here, 82.3% comes from oil, gas, and coal. Pretty staggering number, I find. I'm amazed every time I hear it. Now, that means that everything we do, from getting out of the bed in the morning to turning on the telly and having dinner at night before going to bed again, is completely reliant upon the fossil fuels. That means that going forward, entrepreneurship will need to take on a completely different form, because the resources in the world are running out. And the economic model we have operated under ever since I went to uni, which is almost as long ago as David, have always assumed that resources will always be readily available at the marginal cost of production. We can always find new lands to cultivate. We can always find new oceans to fish in, etc., etc., etc. And that economic model is dead when resources are running out, and you need to rethink it. And for entrepreneurship, it means you will not be able to do everything you want.
So we want to introduce you to Kaka. He's a law student at the University of Nairobi. And we met him over an East African campuses and colleges green network he's setting up. And we met him about his plan to plant 1.5 billion trees and how to make the economics of that work. So,
so normally what we're doing at the moment is that we are doing mass generation of seedlings in public schools that has got water. So that is basically, I think we can think in that line of economics across it. Just recently, I went and talked to the branch manager for Equity Bank, and they were saying they can be sourcing trees from us. And you see for them, they like every year they plant about 100,000 trees. So that means if we have tree seedlings available in large quantity, we can easily land a contract with them whereby they can be able to be buying trees from us.
this was us speaking to them on the pre-launch event. And he's not joking about planting 1.5 billion trees. And he's actually going forward and doing that. But everything we do needs an economics that works. And what we need as an economics is one that allows what we call an emergent economics to come about. And what does that mean? Well, this is another campaign that he has.
So normally what you're doing
is a cleanup campaign. You've seen pictures like this often. And when entrepreneurs look at that today, what they will see is, recycling, right? Rubbish, you can recycle that. You can go on to that. And we use words like circular economy, we use words like sustainability, and all of those things. But in a world where what you need to do is to remove the source of 82.3% of our energy, these kind of build it and they will come ideas just will not work. They are legacies of our world where we built it through additive change. Every problem we have, we solve it by putting another layer on. And today we're putting the layer on using vocabularies of sustainability, net zero, circular, recycle. You heard them all. They all require you to find more energy. So when your job is to push the stop button on climate change and cut oil, gas, and coal production, even when we are not ready, you have to find ways that actually go backwards. And that's subtractive change. How does subtractive change work? Well, take a look at that picture. Subtractive change would ask, who put the rubbish there? Why? Maybe you find it's people commuting to work. Why would commuting to work lead people to drop that much rubbish? Maybe the journey is too long. Well, maybe they should work from home. Why don't they work from home? Maybe they live 8 to a household in one room. Well, what can you do? Well, maybe like Kaka, who found local schools with water to be his tree nurseries, that there are local schools that you can use as work hubs. And maybe that's where the true value lies. So how do you now build entrepreneurship from that understanding and from listening to people about why they drop the rubbish? What if there are no local schools? Well, subtractive change does not do what WeWork did, which is to build all these grand buildings along and say, you can go there and work. Because that's another example of the build it and they will come mentality. Because when you spend the energy to do that and it turns out not to work, you will be doing the same to the planet as WeWork did to SoftBank, take it towards bankruptcy. It's not what we want. So you have to ask questions again. You have to say, what do these people do? What are their skills? What do the office want? What are their demands? And in doing so, entrepreneurship becomes humbler. It seeks to listen rather than to be listened to. And it seeks to understand rather than to be understood. And in doing so, it allows economics to emerge naturally rather than to fit the targets and performance that we want it to produce. And that's an emergent economics that is centered around subtractive change as a crystal ball to where the true value lies. And in our bloated economies today, if we are to push the stop button on climate change, that's what we need to do. Now, we are not coming here to talk to you just to talk about that, actually. We're coming here to talk to you because when we talk with Kaka about his East African campuses and colleges green network, we talk to him about how to bring the economics about. And we want you to join with him to create a global campuses and colleges green network that espouses an economics based on subtractive change, that brings entrepreneurship in a different way. And the reason why is because students are the stem cells of businesses everywhere. You are the energy and the transformation that will take us to the world where we will be able to value the things that give us joy. So if you're interested in that, come and get in touch.
This is Morris. Now I'm going to make full use of my cheat sheet there. Morris is a graduate in petroleum geoscience, and he also lives in Kenya. And he turned his back on that career, and instead he went to work with the communities around him because he had seen and he had had first-hand experience of what climate change does to the communities where he grew up and lived. Africa has 17% of the global population, but only use 3.5% of global energy. They have the youngest demographics of any continent. It's an extremely steep pyramid. 47 out of 54 countries in Africa today are actively exploring for oil and gas. And just recently, Somaliland announced that they had discovered oil. These communities will need to build an economics around what they're doing. And we got in touch with Morris over our initiative, A Lab on Every Farm. A lab is kind of, or sorry, a farm is kind of metaphorical, but it could actually be a farm as well. It's a place where we discover resources and we build livelihoods. A lab is where we experiment to find how we can become resilient in the face of climate change. So for Morris, that meant practically that the drought had forced them to dig ponds in the community where he lived. And they stocked fish in those ponds to fight the mosquitoes and malaria, which is a huge problem and is spreading rapidly everywhere, again, because of climate change. These mosquitoes, they become very resilient in the face of warming planet. Then they feed the fish with chicken feces, and they use the water naturally to fertilize the soil where they plant all their crops. Funnily enough, they don't dig the soil because it's like ripping the roof off whoever lives there and destroys the structure of the home of everyone who is an inhabitant there. But these communities, they need money to be able to do this. And they need to know that if we take away fossil fuels, they will still be able to survive and thrive. So they are building what we call an emergent economics. And the only way we can do that is through a lab on every farm, to discover the hidden resources that are there and build livelihoods around them.
So my daughter, who's 11, has friends whose parents have arranged birthday parties for them. And you know, these birthday parties, they pay like 10 to 20 pounds per child in order to get entertainment. And entertainment is basically crafted experience. And Morris and his community is full of crafted experience. And so here's an example of how you can see resources that are hidden from our eyes, that we just don't see in our world where we have to measure everything alone. We do not see the richness that is inherent in the world around us. So Morris turns out to be also a musician, and we got talking. We were saying, well, what happens in today's Zoom world? We're able to connect your crafted experience with the birthday parties and other gatherings. This way, we can actually generate naturally an economics based on everything that you do in order to improve your lives already. You don't need to do anything more. Your failures and successes are the crafted experience. You don't have to succeed. And if you blend it around a song, making together, and make that into a shared experience and a momentum that we can all have, then actually that could be something that's pretty good. Morris is actually a pretty cool musician. And he shared this with us.
Keep the environment fresh and clean. With no plastics, we need a world with no plastics. Goes perfectly, we found the...
So, what we come to ask is, who here is interested to make this into reality? Get in touch. Now,
keep the environment.
where does that bring us? Remember that climate change is a loan shark that's coming to collect, and it is indiscriminate. Remember that every unit of oil, gas, and coal we use will build up our debt even more. And remember that nobody is actually going to cut production. No one is interested. And remember that net zero is not a stop button, but we do need one. And remember, the only people who will push that stop button are those who value the things that give them joy. So how do we let everybody know that? How does transformational ownership actually work? It works by telling everyone we can just buy the keys to the boardroom doors. We don't have to be locked out them. We don't have to be protesting outside saying, stop this, stop that. And they close the doors, seal the windows, and they don't hear a thing. Warren Buffett bought an oil company last year. He didn't do it to cut production. He did it for the profits that it will make to benefit the fund members he has. And because he does it for that reason, he will ensure production continues for as long as possible for as high a price as he can get. That's how our economics work. But you can transform that with transformational ownership. And how do we do that? We want to make a film. The things that give us joy. It's a film about climate change made by communities everywhere. We have no budget for it, but emerging economics does not need budget. You waste too much time trying to raise money. We want you to help us to go to students who make films, to communities from everywhere you come from, who cares about the things that give them joy, to create clips of things that give them joy. And we weave them together into an epic picture of good versus evil, of villains versus heroes, so that we can take them, and the communities that contribute all the clips can take them to the people they have and ask, if 1 billion people around the world supported transformation ownership, would you be one of them? And to ask the businesses they have, if businesses around the world have pledged $1 trillion for transformation ownership as a fraction of all the money that they receive from us, would you be one of those businesses? Would you choose to be a villain or a hero? Climate change is ultimately about the things that give us joy. They are the reason why we care. They are what gives us faith in the future. And they are what gives us courage to push the stop button. Thank you.
Very happy to take questions. I say that before they're asked, but we will try. We will endeavor to answer them to the best of our ability. Please. I think collectively the moment came. I joined a fund David had been working for a long time. He was head of research there, and I joined them in 2017. And we looked into sustainable investing, we looked into ESG, we looked into all these plans, and we thought, this is going to be lucrative. We've found an area where we can explore even further and find more alpha and make more money. And the more we dug, and the more we kind of actually understood, is the best word, what was going on, the least we liked what we saw. And the more we started fearing that actually this is probably the biggest Ponzi scheme the planet has ever seen. And you cannot hide from climate change. There is no rock you can crawl in under and say, I'm going to take 5 years out and then I'm going to come out and pick up the pieces. when everyone else has been knocked out, and I get in at a really good level. That's just not going to happen because you can't get out of this planet. So it was, I think, a little bit of a eureka moment when we said, you know, this is just not going to work. Because my first-hand experience is very much that I love making money. Let's be clear about that. I'm a die-hard capitalist who will happily carry the cross for the sake of capitalism, because I believe in it. However, my experience tells me it's a lot less fun to make money when everyone else is burning, because they actually don't end up liking you very much. And this is one of those moments cubed and squared and multiplied by any number you can think of. They're really, really not going to like it. So it's pointless in that sense. Because even if you are that rich, what are you going to do with the money when there is nothing for you left to do? I think that's kind of the moment that, I mean, obviously it dropped a lot later for me than for him, you know, but eventually the penny dropped for me as well. And, you know, I've seen Ponzi schemes before, and I know how they work. And this has all the hallmarks of a gigantic, gargantuan Ponzi scheme that has basically been labeled, whatever we want to call it, ESG, net zero, sustainability.
I think we came from experience. My first job, the fund I joined, it had the highest paid market visits. It actually had Nobel laureates. It had vice chairman of Federal Reserve Banks amongst its partnership. So it was hell of a startup, but it was a startup. And it made so much money. It made 40+% return for a few years in a row without a loss over any month, basically. And in 1998, it collapsed, and it took down the world with it. The Fed locked the fund and 14 of the biggest banks around the world into a room and said, you know, a bit like the election of a pope, you don't get out until you've sorted it out. Basically, he goes away. And I remember going to work one morning, walking past Gloucester Road Tube Station, seeing the billboard on the outside saying, you know, Fed rescues LTCM. And I thought, okay, I can carry on my journey and go to work now. In 2007, I left the investment industry because I thought I saw the movie. I'm not going to stay and watch it again. I'm just going to step out. In 2017, we started working together. Yeah. We started looking at all these things. In about 2000, we sort of looked at each other and we thought, you know, Richard saw interest rates go up to 500% in Sweden. He is a person who went along at 9/11 and did his best trade by dropping millions of dollars and saying, this is money well lost. We are used to a world where we see crisis coming and what can we do to get out to protect ourselves. But there is no protecting yourself with climate change without protecting everyone else. And when did we come to that? I think that whole experience we've had, and also a realization that, you know, we do believe in what it's doing. And most of all, most people don't understand just how interconnected our economies are. Climate change will bankrupt us before it drowns us. People just don't get that. And when we become bankrupt, all the efforts we want to support, they go away. There's no funding anymore. Yes. Us finding ways to stop use of coal oil. There have been reports that the largest companies of the world are still investing, like looking at more than 2/3 of solutions into carbon offset as their ways to nullify the damages that are being created. What are your thoughts on? Well, I mean, you know, there's no reason why we shouldn't do everything we can, but we should remember one thing. Back in what 60s, 70s, we thought the way to solve road traffic congestion was to build more roads. And since 2015, we've actually added enough renewable energy capacity to power the UK 6 times over. But in that same time, we've actually added more oil, gas, and coal use over that than that. So when you go along and you go and we talk to a geophysical science guy about, carbon capture and putting them in, and he says, well, you know what happens when you pump gases into the ground? It's called fracking. And you know what happens to communities around where you do that. So you decide what you want to do. And a friend showed us this seawater battery. It was recently published and so on. It's made with various stuff. One of the materials in is molybdenum. We looked it up a bit. Now, it's not elemental molybdenum there, but a tablespoonful of that stuff will kill everybody here. It's immediately fatal. So all of those solutions require us to use more energy. And as we go and say, how do we get more energy? What we have to do is to burn more oil, gas, and coal first. Climate change doesn't understand that actually this is okay, you can wait and stop damaging us because it's going to get better. It doesn't understand that. All it understands is you have burned more oil, gas, and coal. And so to all those solutions and all those things, they are part of how we can make lots of money. And undoubtedly, all of the people involved in those projects will make lots of money. But you will be carrying the can. Yes, please.
I think the absolutely most important thing is, let me go back. I'm thinking in Swedish, that's why, and I'm talking in English. We've been conditioned into a world of thinking about the pot of money. You work 30 years and then you retire for 30 years. And those 30 years we built up, it's going to last. That means essentially you invest as a tourist because all you care about is the return. If you're a VC investor, I'm saying, what is the probability of survival? XXX. And then if I have enough risk project, few of them will come through. It's exactly the same in terms if you have developed companies in your portfolio. I care about next earnings quarter. That's a very, very bad way of investing as a tourist. You need to invest as an owner. Ownership takes the multi view, and you're saying, if I invest as an owner, I actually don't know what the return will be. That's an unknown for me. But I'm going to ensure that this company does the right thing, treats its employees, its clients, its shareholders well, because I am determined I'm going to do things the right way and come down on the right side of history. I don't know what the return will be, but unless my business model is completely defunct, I will end up making money in a return. But I cannot make the return the target variable, because if I do, I end up cutting corners and doing things you shouldn't. That's kind of the central bit for me. We are too focused on saying I need 7% return because that's how I end up with a nest egg that's large enough that I can retire at 55. It's just not going to work going forward. The old economic model of assuming unlimited resources and levering up, whether that's financial or operationally, to build a business to achieve a return target is dead because the resources are no longer available to do so.
I think the crucial element to that question is whether you believe that the world is in a steady state or not. And our economics development has always been that the natural world is in a steady state. And we can therefore carry on extracting our resources, and we hit a recession, we can wait it out and do all those things. So that gives this idea that there's such a thing as an early stage and later and so on, because there's a steady stage, you can wait along and you can see what stage you are at. Our belief is climate change is changing that dimension completely. It is running at us. So this part of, do we have an early stage or late stage or whatever, is related to this part of asking, when do I give back more than I take? Do I do that at every step, or do I do that when I become the billionaire? Yes. Sorry.
What would you think, or would you what would be good, a positive result regarding coming closer to what you have presented us as a regenerative or transformational type of new economic?
It's very simple. It is simply that, take off your hats. So we've spoken with people at all levels. We've spoken to activists, we've spoken with kind of business people, we've spoken with, one of the top climate negotiators between China and US. Everybody wears a hat, and when they wear a hat, what they speak to is their official position. So when you have the 90 billionaires together, they all wear a hat. But the thing about the things that give us joy is to take off that hat and speak as a person who cares about the things that give him or her joy. And when you do that, you recognize we all need to come together. It is not about what the wealthy can do or the poor can do, it's how we come together. And that's what transformation ownership is about. Just one moment, I think there was a... You want to tackle that, or shall I do?
Yeah, I hate the expression. I really don't like it. I think degrowth is some kind of concept that growth is bad. And for me, that's very alien. Growth is good. The problem is a little bit related to the previous question. If I get elected into public office and I go out and I say, I'm going to make sure the economy grows 2.5, I made that my target. That means I'm going to use levers and shortcuts and ways, which in the modern society is mostly through borrowing money, whether it's publicly or privately, to ensure that you hit those growth targets. It's a really, really bad way of running policy. Growth or return can never, ever, in my mind, be the target variable, because it ensures you do bad things along the way. Degrowth, I think, misses the point that growth is good. What's bad is, for a better word, doping to achieve those kind of results that we're craving, because we're using things we shouldn't. And we're going to end up paying for it down the road. And we very much like the expression of climate change being that kind of loan shark that's going to come knocking at your door when you can least afford it, and it's always going to come away with a pound of flesh. And too much of today's policies, whether publicly, definitely so, and a lot of corporate policies, are essentially kicking the can down the road for others to deal with tomorrow, as long as I can ensure 2.5% growth during my period in office. It's a really, really bad way for me to see it. But I don't believe in growth is bad concept, which is what the degrowth people generally are pushing forward. I think you have a natural level of trajectory that comes from mankind's ability to do things better, because ultimately we learn from our mistakes and we end up doing things better, and then you get growth. What's not okay is achieving that through doping, if you pardon this sort of a comparison. And that's what we're doing at the moment in most cases.
Sorry. Well, the very important thing is really, really important question, because in a world that you want to go to, where you are cutting off the source to 98.3% of our energy, what you've got to make sure what you do doesn't waste energy. And that's why our initiative of a lab on every farm is not about trying to advocate what we want. It's about helping people to discover the resources that they have, to be able to have lives that they are going to sing about. You want to make sure, and that's why our film we want to make is not about raising money and lots of capital to make some blockbuster movie. but it's about helping people to see the things in their lives that give them joy. So what you end up having to do, what you really want to do, is to make sure that we get into the mindset of this really an emergent economics that comes naturally out of what it is, based upon subtractive change, so that we can actually live better lives as we go along through. And to the question of growth or degrowth, in a way, they are the wrong pitches. They are the planet has never asked the question, do I grow or degrowth? It has only come about because we frame it in terms of numerical measures. How do you measure degrowth? How do you measure growth? Once you start measuring something, which at a core sense, we all know, we all feel. And we know if it's right, we know if it's wrong. And it's about recovering that and having people and helping them to do that in that way. So in that sense, what we do with our transformation ownership, and what we want to do within there, is to get people to join within this by appreciating that they have a place where they can have joy in their lives as being the source of how we can get the momentum to it. And the essence of the film is that you will see clips of people with the things that give them joy. It's very important. Joy is what gives us faith in the future. Yes.
I think we'll be able to take one more question, and then you can continue with the wine reception and ask the speakers privately. Thanks.
Okay.
But do you think work in a practical sense, I mean, for a person in power, if we can, what gives you joy, and remove your hat and observe it and then do the right thing, that really works.
Well, there's this part, do we do this in order to try and persuade people? What is it that we do? There's a book by a philosopher called Moral Man and Immoral Society, Reinhold Niebuhr, I think. And it's meant to be Barack Obama's favorite book. And there's this essence where as you push forward into what you think is the right thing, ultimately you cross a boundary where it becomes immoral because you've made it somehow a go beyond what it actually is. What we think is that climate change will tell the story for ourselves. The world is not in an equilibrium. When you ask that story, that question, that's a question that belongs to a world in equilibrium. We are not. California, this period, have seen the consequences. The stars have been evicted from their homes. The world is not in an equilibrium. So we don't need to persuade people about that story because the story will tell itself. What we need to do is to be able to bring people together to recognize they have a choice. And the choice is whether they continue to use oil, gas, and coal or not. And that's what transformation ownership does. It simply shapes out that choice. And he asked this question, do we come together and actually face that, or do we rather not to? It is that essence of choice. In our book, we have a chapter called Choices, and it talks about Hobson's choice. And it goes on through about it, and that's where it is. And then subsequent following that, we have one about good and evil. And the essence of good and evil, going back to the time of, what was it, St. Augustine.
387 AD.
It's not about what is good and what is evil. Good comes from accepting the boundaries and the limits that there are. And we are facing boundaries and limits. And so do we accept them? Do we actually then mature and become working together with the planet, not as an extractive force, but to recognize what people back then who were less able to be as extractive as we have become, that actually good comes from not doing too much.
I I think that's extraordinarily central. I have two children, both of them in their 20s, and I think their sort of studying expenses are behind them. I hope so. And you plow through, their first job, advertising. Should I go for that, Dad? Should I go for that? Every time you read one of these propositions, people talk about the ability to think outside the box. It's a standard. Thinking outside the box, like David describes, it's cheating. Because thinking outside the box forces you to not accept the limits that have been imposed upon you. And this is how we see the planet and its people. When you are going outside the box that's been constrained by what we actually physically can do, you're cheating. The best thing you can do is accept those limits. Move on. Try to become better within this box and do things in a more clever fashion. Going around the hindrances is essentially cheating. And the planet is now handed you the yellow card, and soon the red card comes out for having taken too much from me. And we think climate change will bankrupt us long, long before it drowns us.
So we are actually, here overnight. We'll be around tomorrow morning. What should we do? We could be staying around in the bar area or something.
I like a bar. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
We
you.
still need to divide up the
Oh,
two
yeah.
books for the
Yes.
good
What were the
questions.
best questions? You pick one, I pick one.
This is hard.
You know what? I'm going to ask simpler. Hands up, everybody who asked a question. Well, there's only 3 people here. Four,
Oh,
five,
that's too many. Too many.
5, 6. So now how do we pick one? So pick.
Okay, I'm going to pick the degrowth question because I really hate the term. Please. Yes. And I find it contrary to, I find it,
And let me pick the last one.
for one simple
There you
word,
go.
I find it
Thank you.
defeatist. And I am not. I'm an optimist. I'm a hopeful person. Actually, I'm a lot more hopeful than my more, dire outward predictions generally portray. I'm very hopeful, but degrowth is a defeatist story saying, you know what, we're done. We
Thank you.
cannot grow. We
Thank you very much.
Really good.
Course we can.
Yeah.
Ingenuity overcomes a
wanna
lot
talk
of
to you about
hurdles,
my,
but for God's
Yeah,
sake,
sure. Yeah,
give
yeah.
the planet a
Very
chance.
I know you
Yeah.
still have the microphone.
Oh, gosh.
Oh,
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
Yep.
Really good.
Thank you so much for coming and listening in, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you.
We'll be around if you have any questions.
At a different level.
Oh, absolutely.
We are still trying to climb the position where we haven't had really financially. You understand, that's not the case. What do you teach them? He's 11. What do you think is?
She went for a school, she just gone to secondary school.
Exactly.
And then she said they have this question for us, challenge. There are 2 polystyrene spheres about that size, and they said do something with them. And the stew is all about, doing good, sustainability. So she went along and she painted